Bukayo Saka! That is a goal! Wanyeri tries one!
The past week has been a mixed bag for MLS. First, he scores on his debut for England, and then some guys who play in the MLS do pretty badly for the U.S. men's national team. This is Not That Kind of Gooner, and we are coming to you a little over halfway through the international break. Not much has really happened on the Arsenal side, aside from, of course, the small matter of Miles Lewis-Skelly starting his first cap for England, scoring a goal very quickly on his debut, and he then made his second appearance for England earlier today. And we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about Declan Rice's performances for England as well. And we're also going to do a little bit of chat about the United States men's national team and, their recent performances against Panama and Canada and kind of how we feel about that team. And yeah, it's not going to be the most Arsenal-centric pod that we've ever done, but, that is the international break, unfortunately. So we're going to get into that. And by we, I mean myself and Drew, who you can follow on Twitter at GeeChyKid and on Blue Sky at Supply and Demand Drew. Drew, how are you doing, my friend?
Yeah, I'm doing well. I'm beginning a 5-day spell of no work. I get the week off, so I'm really looking forward to actually getting some sleep for once in my life, which is grand. Other than that, yeah, I'm doing really well. It's good to be back chatting with you, of course. And I'm still pretty excited about watching our boy do some bits for England lately, so that's been nice to see.
Yeah, it's and first of all, sleep is underrated. I can tell you that much. I used to be one of those people who slept like 5 to 6 hours a night, and then I married someone who does not function if she does not get 7.5 at the least, and so I get that much now, if not a little bit more on a regular basis, and really changed my life, honestly. So yeah, but looking forward to talking about Lewis-Skelly. Of course, this is just temporary. Obviously, Newcastle fans, you're right. Lewis Hall's definitely going to come in and take the spot that Lewis-Skelly warmed up for him, despite the fact that, we've had a couple really good performances out of Lewis-Skelly. But, yeah, we'll get into that. And we'll also...
You've got Jet Spence at Spurs as well, who apparently is the greatest thing since sliced bread.
Oh, so, of course. Jet Spence.
Yeah. The world-class Jet Spence. Yeah, 100%.
Oh, yikes. Yeah, we'll talk about that. And yeah, we're also going to chat about our own boys back here in the United States and how that's going. So yeah, we'll get into that. But first, the admin. Of course, you can follow me on Twitter at Shamsdale. You can follow me on Blue Sky at shamsdale.bsky.social. And you can follow the pod at Not That Gooner on both Twitter and Blue Sky. And we've got an Instagram account, Not That Kind of Gooner. We've got a YouTube account, Not That Kind of Gooner. And yeah, just follow the pod on those accounts, and we'd really appreciate it. So let's go ahead and get started with the Lewis-Skelly England conversation, right? So Lewis-Skelly got his first call up to the senior national team last week and proceeded to immediately earn a start against... why am I already forgetting who they played? I know they played Latvia today. Albania. Earned a start against Albania, and, within minutes, scored the go-ahead goal. It was a really nice ball from Bellingham, just broke the lines. Lewis-Skelly made this great run kind of around the back and out-muscled his man to slide the ball past the keeper. So, Drew, I mean, what did you make of that goal? And, is that something you saw coming, or, are you not surprised that Lewis-Skelly kind of balled out in his first game for England?
I feel like it was the right time to give him his debut, and obviously, I try to be very careful about making sure I don't disrespect other national teams or club teams, and obviously there's no disrespect to Albania, but I feel like trying to bed a young player in against an Albania would go a lot further than, say, if you're playing against Spain. despite how well Lewis Kelly has come on for us this season. I know I didn't expect him to get his debut goal and start breaking England records from match one under Tuchel, but I obviously for him, I'm quite pleased. But I'm also not surprised to see him taking up the spaces he took up to get that goal. We've seen it at Arsenal before. We know how well he kind of inverts coming in as a left back. We know that he's performed similarly as a midfielder at youth level as well. So, the thing for me that is most telling is I think we're kind of seeing some bits from how Tuchel intends to set the team up. And England are, I wouldn't call them a team in flux per se, but he's definitely going to run that ship differently than Southgate. They're going to be far more tactically astute. The assignments are going to be much different. And there's other questions that permeate around the 11, in regards to if there's space for Phil Foden, that kind of thing. So there's probably no better time for Lewis Kelly to come on so well for us when you're a new national team manager coming in the door. It's your due diligence to look at the lay of the land and who in the player pool you currently have available and give them chances early on when things aren't detrimental yet. So it could have been a perfect storm for him. And certainly scoring a goal in the opening, 10, 12 minutes, whatever it was, if I remember correctly. You couldn't have dreamed up a better performance for him, particularly with his mom and his grandmother in attendance at Wembley. That was, that's something special. And I remember watching the goal and you could see the absolute disbelief on his face where he just he's living the dream and it's what you want to see. And obviously, as a Black person, you want to big up people in your own community with how well they're doing, especially young Black players, given so much of the flack that he received from media and fans, and that he's still receiving despite putting in two very good performances in his first two appearances. He's still getting heat on social media, and that's a bit frustrating, obviously. But overall, it's hard to not be absolutely pleased for him. Makes us as Arsenal fans happy to think that if Ethan Nwaneri keeps performing for us in England under 21, so he also scored in his England under 21 debut earlier today. You think that there's a space where we could realistically look at England, a year from now, maybe going into 2026, and seeing Saka, Nwaneri, Lewis Kelly, and Rice in the same England squad. That is, that would just be fantastic and kind of a testament to where we've come on as a club as well. So.
I wouldn't count out Ben White either.
Sure. Tuchel did. Tuchel sat down with him, didn't he? Right, and had a chat. So that's very possible as well. You're not wrong.
Yeah, on the subject of Tuchel, I think I've been really impressed with kind of the first impressions, right? Where I think back to that interview he gave, or at least it came out last week, and they're asking him, "Do you think that England had an identity last year at the Euros?" And he just flat out said no. He was like, "No, I don't think so." And they're like, what were they missing? Like, what do you intend to instill in this England team? He said, that hunger, that fight, that mentality of showing up at matches and at tournaments knowing that you're the team to beat. I want us to play like we're the team to beat. And he also said something about how, England under Southgate always played like they were afraid to go out of a tournament, which I think is 100% correct. I think Southgate, always set up his team with like double sixes, and they played a low block, and it tried to hit, even, again, with all due respect, even teams with weaker rosters, they tried to hit them on the counter a lot of the time. Like they were playing. We were playing a low block, basically, or not we, but England were playing a low block against Slovakia during the Euros.
Which is crazy. And again, there's no disrespect, but there are absolute. I mean, there's a considerable level between the best that Slovakia can bring to the table and the best that England can bring to the table. And I do think when you look at the sides that not only people talk about now internationally in the current space, but when you think about previous international teams that have gone on to win whatever it was, the Euro, CONMEBOL, Copa America, the World Cup, even AFCON. Genuinely, the teams typically that win it are the ones that go out and know they have a chance to win the whole thing. And I feel like, and when you have the type of talent that permeates in the England setup currently, a lot of pundits will debate it, but it's certainly one of the best two talent pools that England has ever had, I would say, top to bottom. or at least very close to that. So if that's what you have to platform those players and give them the best chance of winning. And I got into this gigantic Twitter conversation yesterday, and I was basically kind of just like scrunching my brain about it because I forget who was the person kept trying to find ways to squeeze Phil Foden into the team and build a team around Phil Foden. But why that frustrated me so much is because you can't build a team around a player who was known to be a system player. You plug Phil Foden into a system where his piece of that puzzle makes sense. But England have so many players that can stand alone that you need to platform. And that's kind of the conversation that England has to be having, and ironically, a conversation about the U.S. we're going to have later, where when you have the likes of Bukayo Saka, even Harry Kane, who I despise because he was at Spurs, but there's no denying that Harry Kane is incredibly effective when you give him the right system and the right chances. He scores goals, period. You've got Anthony Gordon coming on, you've got Jude Bellingham. When you have all these kind of players, and I do think we can criticize Tuchel's some of his performances at club level with PSG. I mean, I loved him at Dortmund before he left, obviously. I think Chelsea fans will probably bite themselves a little bit for wanting him gone, although a lot of Chelsea fans didn't want him gone, in fairness. But I do think, as a tactician, he's probably one of the best tacticians in Europe over the last 5-6 years. And when you have that kind of manager in the door and you have the pieces you have, and I think he's correct when he came in and said there was no identity here. I don't think people genuinely feared England, which is crazy to me because there's so many players in the England team where if you put them in the best possible scenario to win, you should be fearful of them. And if you can get England playing like that, they should rightly be considered a favorite in 26, here, and then in Euro 2028. So
yeah, I think a lot of people didn't like it when I came down hard on Southgate over the years, but the reason. I don't think Gareth Southgate was anything close to a good manager. I'll just put that out there now. And the reason I say that is because, in my opinion, the job of a manager is to maximize the resources that they have, right? And Gareth Southgate took a roster that I think could win the Premier League, right? You put the England national team in the Premier League, and I think it's in a title race at the very least. He took that roster and conspired to just grind out games and really ride their luck, and they didn't dominate matches, and they always played on the back foot, and it was just really, I think it was cowardly how Southgate deployed that team. So now you have Tuchel, who I think the most succinct way I can describe how much I rate Thomas Tuchel is if Mikel Arteta decided tomorrow to leave Arsenal, Tuchel is maybe top 5 on the list of people that I would call about replacing Arteta. I think he's an excellent manager. Like you said, great tactician. I think over the course of his career, he's gotten better at just kind of understanding players and kind of being able to communicate his ideas to them. And yeah, he's come in and he immediately realizes what level of talent he has at his disposal. And I think he's set about really using it. And, kind of tie this back to the Foden conversation. One of the things that pissed me off to no end last summer was watching everybody and their mother advocate for Foden to come into this team at the expense of Bukayo Saka. And then, people were saying you need to build this team around Foden, and it didn't work, right? And the reason for that is, like you said, Drew, Foden is an extremely talented player, but he's not a guy who grabs games by the scruff of the neck on a regular basis. He's not the guy that, he's not the guy who turns around to the rest of the team and just says, just give me the ball. Just give me the ball and I'll make the rest happen.
I mean,
right?
he's not Steph Curry, to throw it back to like an American sporting perspective.
Yeah.
And I feel like England have a few of those. He's not one of them, and that's okay. Like there's nothing wrong with being. And again, this is no disrespect to Phil Foden. And I think fans sometimes don't understand how good you have to be to become a professional footballer. Even to just play in the Championship, League One, you have to be very good to be at a top club in the world, competing for Champions League, Premier League year on year, and making it into the England setup in general, you're one of the 0.0000001% footballers on the planet who are that good. And I think fans generally forget that sometimes. So it's not that Phil Foden isn't an exceptionally good player. It's that Phil Foden, he came through a system at City under Pep where it's to the point now where he basically can't survive unless he's in that system. And why that's so telling is because the best Barca team of all, the reason why Spain got so good rapidly is because they relied on so many players from that Barca system. And they just plugged that Barca system into the Spanish national team and they reaped success over it. And there's nothing wrong with that. Why a lot of the best German teams over the years had so many Bayern players in it. Like when you have those when you can just take a large chunk of system pieces and players that have that understanding at club level and plug them into the national team, usually you'll get some kind of results off that. But Foden, English is not going to be that way under Tuchel. It just isn't. And also, the majority of England players, I feel like, aren't made for a Pep system either. So unless Pep becomes England manager and starts plugging in all these players that fit his system, and then you'll probably see a better Foden, sure. But I don't think that's ever going to happen under Tuchel. No. It's just one of those things where, and also I think you agreed with me when I said this ages ago, where England would never be a serious contender to actually win a World Cup until they got a foreign manager. And moving this back over to the Southgate conversation, he was such a relic of how so many people still perceive English football that I think is misguided, because the best managers in Premier League history are all foreign, period. The best managers currently are all foreign. The only England manager, I feel like, maybe one and a half, but the only guaranteed English manager, I feel like that could maybe do it with the national would be Eddie Howe. You could maybe have a shout for Graham Potter. I think that's maybe a bit of a stretch. I would say if it's Eddie Howe or Boss, if you're looking at English only, but too many of England's best players play in systems that are not English-based, that they're way more technical. They're led by whether someone from Spain or if Germany or France over the years or wherever it may have been, it's not an English manager. So when you have players of that profile, you need to give them the best chance to shine under a manager who thinks football similarly. And then vice versa, they bring in a manager who can get the best out of players who have been brought through systems, trained in systems, and developed in systems, and now are platformed in systems that are far more continental-based than English-based. So, and thankfully for Lewis Kelly, that's been happening at Arsenal, and I feel like that's why his transition might be a bit more seamless than we think. So
yeah, and that's why I watched the Latvia game earlier today, and I actually really enjoyed it because the midfield they had, was Rice, Bellingham, and Rodgers, and then you had Lewis Skelly tucking in from left back as well. So you had a really powerful, dynamic midfield, but also still with like technical and attacking quality in it, right? Bellingham, we all know that Bellingham's kind of a perennial Ballon d'Or candidate at this point. Declan Rice, I think, is emerging as maybe the best two-way midfielder on the planet. Or at least one of the best. I think Morgan Rogers has had a hell of a year, and he's, increasingly, he's increasing his stature in the English game. And then Lewis Skelly is just a player who at the age of 18 really already knows how to expertly use his body, was pinging line breakers for a lot of the game, really intelligent in terms of his positioning. And, I was watching all these players, or, I was watching these four midfielders essentially run the show for England and, help pin Latvia in their third, and also, just kind of pull the strings in terms of getting the ball into the final third and trying to work the angle for a shot and getting, guys like Kane and even like Eze into, and Rashford into good positions, to have attempts on goal. And it was just a great midfield, and kind of one of the things that was so conspicuous about it to me was that Foden wasn't in it. And, that's not to pick on Foden, but I just think sometimes players are just not right for the moment or right for the set of circumstances that you're in, and that's okay. You know, it doesn't mean they're a bad player, but yeah, I think for Tuchel to pick up so early on that maybe Foden is a guy who comes off the bench instead of someone who starts the matches, I think already shows how intelligent or how much more intelligent about his team he is than Southgate was. But yeah, really interested to see how England does, and yeah, also really excited about kind of Lewis Skelly, and it looks like Tuchel had nothing but praise for him. Tuchel really seems to appreciate what kind of a player he is. But yeah, I guess before we move on to the other national team we're going to talk about today, I'll just ask for a prediction from you. How many Arsenal players do you think, based on what you're seeing right now, make it into England's 2026 World Cup squad?
I would probably say, I think right now on the balance of evidence, I would say 3 for sure. I think, and we talked about this on a previous pod. I'm almost positive. If not, it was a thread we were on Twitter, where there was discussions about do we transition Lewis Skelly into as a midfielder going into the summer, and I think one or both of us said that his pathway to development, both at Arsenal, is as a left back, because we're going out, we're trying to buy Zubimendi. There's talks about Naipan, Rice exists. Odegaard is still there. Nwaneri can play centrally. All these kind of things. So it would make sense if he's breaking into the team as a left back, and we have questions about that position beyond Calafiori. Zinchenko's probably going to be leaving. Tierney's probably going to be leaving. The minutes are there at left back, right? So we should probably be developing as left back. And now, if you genuinely think about it, I don't know many genuine England left backs available that have been performing as consistently as he has, and have been so good from the very beginning at left back in an England shirt. I think Lewis Hall is actually a very good player. I think it'll be between him and Lewis Hall fighting in that position, and that's pretty solid. But I do kind of feel like if I had to be, I guess, put another rung over it, I would say Lewis Skelly, Rice, and Saka. I think those 3 guys are on evidence. If nothing changes, as long as they continue performing as they have been, I think those 3 are nailed on starters for the 11. I think it depends how Ben White comes back.
Yeah.
And a lot of that has to do with Timber. Timber has been so good for us as well. If Timber stays fit, it's hard to just automatically drop him out of the 11 if you're Arteta, in favor of White. But the thing with White is White had such good understanding with Saka. If he rediscovers that doesn't just benefit Arsenal, that benefits England as well. And then you have 4 Arsenal players who know each other so well tactically. If you're a manager, you want to tap into that if you can, right? So I would say 3 for sure, provisionally 4 with Ben White. I don't think Nwaneri is ready yet. And this is something I urge a lot of fans, do not put him further than he needs to be right now. If he's getting consistent minutes for under 21s, and he's playing for us for reliably consistent as well, I should say, then that's all we need right now. We don't need to force that narrative too. I know it would be great if he was in the team too, but we don't have to force it, right? So we do need some patience. But I would say 3 for sure, provisionally 4, and I would say Nwaneri will be in the team come the Euros. That I would say.
Yeah, I mean, on the subject of Nwaneri, I think it's, like you said, it's really important to not only remember where Nwaneri is in his progression as a player, but also remember how absolutely crazy England's talent pool is right now. We were just talking about how great England's midfield looks right now, and you have Rice and Rodgers and Bellingham and Foden and Eze and Palmer.
Yeah.
And Henderson. I actually think Henderson's looked solid in the couple appearances he made this break.
There's Bowen, there's Gordon, there's quite a few attacking players that are there in the pool.
Yeah, so. Midfield and the wide positions, like those, it's going to be really tough for him to break in right now. And then, just kind of as evidence of how stacked the English talent pool is. Right, I have the U21 squad pulled up right now, and let me just read some of the names on here. Right, Rico Lewis, Jared Branthwaite, Archie Gray, Adam Wharton, Joe Bellingham, Jaden Philogene, James McAtee, Omari Hutchison, Harvey Elliott, Ethan Waneri. By the end of the season, there's going to be multiple guys on that roster with a Premier League medal to their name.
Yep,
and they can't get into the England national team because of just how stacked that roster is. So
there's also Giddens, if you didn't mention him, and there's a lot of shots for a lot of teams want to bring him into the Premier League. So all of a sudden he comes into focus as well. Yep. If he comes to the Premier League and starts performing away from Dortmund, that's another name into the pool. And I saw someone today, I think it was today, say that they felt that Nwaneri was the second best right wing that England have beyond Saka, and I was just like, stop. Like, no. This is already, like, you're already doing it to yourselves. Please, for the love of Christ. Like, some perspective. Like, this is kind of what I mean. I understand fans get excited, but that's such a wild take. Like, if he was that good, he would have been in this English squad, period. Tuchel would have selected him in the team. He would be there. If he was genuinely that good. And he's a player I rate, and he's a player that I think has a bright future. I think he will go far. I don't think that's debatable. But... And I want to put this to you too. I just feel like, and I want your 2 cents. I just feel like a lot of players, they look at the Lamine Yamals of the world, and they want their own version of that for a club and internationally, to the point where any player that's young, like under 19, that comes through that shows some measure of gifted footballing ability and some measure of promise, all of a sudden it's like they have to be chucked into the front lines instantaneously, and that can be as detrimental as it can be as a positive. You can definitely throw players into the fold far too early, and it actually hampers their development instead of helps their development. So, I mean, maybe you have a different take on that. I just feel like fans, everyone's looking for the next biggest wonder kid as soon as possible. And sometimes you have to let players progress at their own rate, because every player has their own rate of progression compared to other players. So, I don't know.
When I was growing up, my parents did this thing where they would always ask me why I wasn't doing as well as their friends' kids, right? If I got, a 96 on an exam, I would hear nothing but, Sammy and Khaled got hundreds, right? If I got into a certain school, I would hear, they got into a school that's ranked 10 places above you. Why didn't you get into that school, right? And so on and so forth. Fast forward to now, and I'm happier than those guys are. I don't want to say doing better, even though I also think that's an accurate descriptor. But
Hey, don't bring me into family drama on this podcast. That's a disclaimer. I don't want to be involved. I'm just kidding.
No. It's not.
I know.
but I mean, like, just I'm doing fine, right?
Yeah.
And I hear things through the grapevine that that are a little vindicating from time to time. And
sure.
the general point I'm trying to make here, right, is comparisons are very rarely useful, very rarely productive, especially in football. And I feel like so much of football discourse and so much of football content has devolved into just like 98% comparisons, and no one enjoys players anymore, really.
Yeah, 100%.
And so with Lamine Yamal, amazing. I love watching that. I love watching Yamal.
Yeah.
Like, just absolutely ludicrous player. Maybe the best player in the world, and he's 17, right? So I get why people see a 17-year-old balling out like that, and then they see our 17-year-old who's really fucking talented, and they're just like, oh, well, like, they could be the same. They're not, and that's okay.
Yeah.
And then that's okay. Ethan Waneri is still incredible. He is still immensely talented. He's still going to go right to the top. It's just going to take a couple extra years, and that's okay, right? Yep. And so, I don't ever want to like criticize a teenager, right? But like there have been a couple games this season where Nwaneri's played and he's had a couple actions that made me think to myself, not that refined, right? Or he should do better than that. And like that's stuff that he's going to improve upon with experience, and that's stuff that's gonna improve with time. But I think the guy's already played like 2,000 plus minutes as a 17-year-old for the first team already, right? Like that's already amazing for a player his age. And kind of I think I have kind of this rule in my head where if you are not like regularly featuring for your first team by the age of 20, you are probably not going to end up being a superstar, right? And that's not always true, but I feel like most of the time there's a correlation there. So I think Nwaneri's on track to be a superstar. He's probably just not going to be Lamine Yamal. And if that's failure, then everybody's failing, So I think Nwaneri, after a few years, players going to retire. Bone's going to retire. Henderson's going to be too old to play. The spaces will open, and if he's good enough, he'll get in, and I think he'll be good enough. But for now, we just have to enjoy where he is.
Yeah, no, I think that's perfectly said. Yeah, I don't want to get into too much. I mean, the amount of stuff I see from Yamal every week because of work. There are certain moments when I'm covering Barca, if I have to cover Barca, where you're just like, what the hell? Like at 17, like crazy. And I don't think it's a weird stretch to say that he's definitely one of the best players on the planet currently as a 17-year-old. And that's very rare that you can say that about any footballer. You couldn't say that about Cristiano Ronaldo at 17, for the record. You probably couldn't even say that about Messi at 17. And that brings up a whole other discussion about if the overall talent pool currently is not as good as of the previous generation. That's a whole other podcast. That's a whole other couple of podcasts.
No.
To be fair,
I don't want to talk about that.
We're not going down that route right now. No. Because if we get started, we'll be here for 3 hours. But all that matters is, I agree. I think, I think that line of delineation is correct. Typically, when you think about players that are destined for footballing stardom, or actually most sports, you could maybe say baseball is the exception because baseball is exceptionally hard to master. But you could probably say even like, NFL. You do have players come into the NFL after 1 year of college, 2 years of college, as a 19 or 20-year-old, and do quite well. You see it in the NBA. You get Sean Kemp didn't even go to college. He went right to the NBA and became dominant early. LeBron James, another obvious
straight out of high school.
Straight out of high school, right. So you get in the NHL, you have 18, 19-year-olds going to the NHL, and right off the bat, Sidney Crosby, like players like of that level. When you're that good and you're 18, 19 years old, doesn't really matter, right? Football's no different. So I would agree, I think, by the time a player is 19 or 20, if they're not regularly playing and or one of the best 2 or 3 players at their respective club, they're probably not going to become a superstar. Doesn't mean they won't have a very good career, but players that go right to the top usually are pinging radar screens by that. And you have exceptions. Like, people forget Robert Lewandowski had a horrendous start to his career.
Yeah.
When he was in Poland, when he was at Lech Poznan. He went to Dortmund, didn't start firing until I think it was his 3rd season where I think at that time he was 23 or 24 by then. And Polish scouts once joked that like he would never have a professional career because he didn't start well. Sometimes it happens. Yeah. Late bloomers are a thing. But yeah, no, I don't want to waste too much time on it. But yeah, when it comes to Nwaneri and also with Lewis Skelly, and I do think, just circling back before we press on, he's doing so well. We do have to be a bit cautious about putting the way we analyze him as a player far beyond what he's still actually capable of. Because we still see he still does make mistakes at Arsenal. He still does give possession away stupidly some of the time. He still will take up the wrong positions half the time. He will bad fouls, the red cards. That still shows that he is still an unfinished article at his age. It doesn't mean he's not a very good player, but he has 3 or 4 years of refining left. And But on the flip side, when you think about it, when you're already this good and you still have 3 or 4 years to actually rough out the edges, how good he's going to be later is kind of all that matters.
Yeah. And so if you're doing this thing of, looking at Winery and wishing he was Lamine Yamal and, kind of trying to project out what you think he's going to be, but treat him as that now, I think you're just kind of setting yourself up for disappointment. And he's already on track to have an amazing career. So, I just think just enjoy it for what it is right now. And we're going to blink, and Ethan Winery and Miles O'Skelly and maybe a couple other players out of Hale End are going to be leading this team. And, that's the most that we can hope for. So, I think that's kind of all I have to say on the Winery thing. So, tell you what, why don't we move across the Atlantic now and talk about something that's a little closer to home for both of us, which is the U.S. men's national team. So, I think most of our listeners are American, but for those of you who aren't, need some catching up, we hired Maurizio Pochettino of Spurs and Chelsea fame to take over the U.S. men's national team, which I, for one, think was like the best case scenario. I didn't even think Pochettino was on the radar. But we hired Pochettino to take over the team, and we currently sit at a record of 5 wins, no draws, 3 losses. And 2 of those losses have come during the international break, where we lost against Panama in the final minute. I think it was like the 99th minute of, or like the 9th minute of stoppage time. Panama scored a winner, and then they went and celebrated with Thierry Henry, because of course they did. And then we played Canada yesterday, and we lost 2-1 to Canada against Panama. We went out of the Nations League semifinals, quarterfinals, and then I think this is the 3rd place match against Canada. We lost the semifinals against Canada. I honestly don't care about the Nations League. I feel like a lot of people see semifinals and they assume it's a big deal. I don't, but yeah, people are really up in arms about the U.S. men's national team right now, and it's very doom and gloom. I think there's already people asking for the U.S. soccer to fire Pochettino, which I think is crazy. And just the vibes are far from immaculate. So Drew, I mean, before we get into specifics, where are you at right now with the U.S. men's national team in terms of the direction they're headed in, and how good they really are?
I think I've probably said this in 4 or 5 different mediums over the last couple of days, where I hope these results really get fans to understand that the vast majority of the U.S. player pool is not as good as they have been made out to be. That includes Christian Pulisic, by the way. And we'll come on to that later, of course. But I do think that there's got to be some measure of perspective. And I was in a conversation thread yesterday evening about this, where if as the host nation of a World Cup, you always hope that you don't get grouped. That's the first thing. You hope, and you can vibe off home energy and make a deeper run, quarterfinals, semifinals, whatever. It's also very hard to win a World Cup as a host because there's added pressure, right? A lot of hosts usually don't go incredibly deep in tournaments. So that's all well and good. I think hiring Pochettino, I agree, was probably the best case scenario in terms of managerial gravitas. Sure, like I didn't see that happening. But I do think that when you add the host nation and how the sport has grown here, and then you add Pochettino into the mix, and you have a lot of the sound bites you have around particular players in the pool, I think it set a lot of people up for humbling. And I do think this is a humbling that was needed, but it also leaves more than enough time to rectify it, which is important. We're not having this conversation 2 months out of the World Cup. We're having it more than a year out of the World Cup. That's important. And it's funny because when I was at work, it had to have been last week. It was before the semifinal for the Nation League, before the Panama match, and I'm pretty sure it was at a Sports Illustrated fan site that put out an article that said it was the preview of the match, and in the title it said, "And why you should expect the U.S. to lose again to Panama," and they called it. And fair play to them. And I think what that boils down to me is, no matter how good Pochettino-ish was as a manager, and this goes on to Landon Donovan's comments, post-mortem, was that you can debate if this is the best overall talent pool the U.S. has ever had. For a lot of people, they think it is. For me, I would say it's probably top two. Because I think being a talented player isn't just about how good you are technically, by the way. You're more, being a technical player it's more than that. But this team, its level of cohesiveness, it's not there. The work ethic applied is not there. I think so. For me, I would say a lot of the reactions are valid, but at the same time, I'm not surprised because you saw. I don't think they should have stuck with Berhalter, but I do think, and this kind of goes back to a Southgate conversation and Tuchel, where I feel like they had the right man for the job in BJ Callahan. You saw the immediate improvement in performance under Callahan when he was interim manager for the U.S. He had a better understanding of a lot of the players. Being a U.S.-based coach, he's managed in MLS. And after he left, you look at Nashville currently, they look the best they've ever looked for the last how many years under his tenureship. I do think the U.S. fell prey to, well, we're the host nation, we have expectations, we need to get a big name because this has to be the year we make a name for ourselves. You can still do that without having a big name manager. So I feel like overall, my thoughts kind of are, like I said before, this is a humbling that was needed, but also conversations need to be had about how you move forward in terms of you can't start squeezing in all your best players. We just had this conversation about England. It's the same conversation for the U.S. It's not about the best players. It's about how the collective functions to the level you need it to beat teams that are all better than you. Because I don't put any faith in FIFA rankings. The U.S. is, for me, not even in the top 15 in the world in terms of talent, overall talent, collectively in the national team. And when you're going into a World Cup, you can rattle off 10 teams who have a much greater chance of winning the whole thing than the U.S. does. It's Brazil, Argentina, France, Spain, Germany, Portugal, England. I would say Uruguay probably have a better shout. So what are we at, 9 now? So yeah, I'd say there's probably I'd have to sit down and think about it, and that's just probably regarding talent alone. When you think about experience at the highest level, consistency, elite level play, I would say there are other teams you probably have to add to that mix too.
Nigeria.
So, yeah, there's just a lot of teams that are just they don't get the press. So and they probably aren't spoken enough about. Japan as well. Japan are always one of the best technical teams at a World Cup, and they're so much fun to watch.
They're so good.
Yeah, and they're so fun to watch. So I just kind of feel like this needs to the conversation now after the postmortem. This needs to be how to get the best out of the collective, and it's not always going to be about do we have the biggest names. It's do we have the right puzzle pieces, because that's the only way the U.S. are going to be able to overperform to the point of where they maybe start thinking about making the last 8 or deeper. So
yeah, I think a lot of U.S. fans don't really follow the sport outside of the MLS. And I think because of maybe a lack of knowledge, they feel like the U.S. have this divine right to be the best team in North America now that Mexico is in a bit of a lull in terms of their overall talent pool. And it just doesn't work like that. And I think people are drastically overrating some of the players that we have. Christian Pulisic gets talked about like God in the
which
U.S.
which is crazy to me. Like, politics aside, I feel like he's arguably the most individually gifted player, or one of, that we've ever had. But a lot of US fans have never seen some of the prior players. Like, people don't realize how good Tab Ramos was, for the record. Like, that kind of thing. He was one of the best technicians the US have ever had, and most of the generation currently have never, either they don't know who he is, or they never saw him play. Claudio Reyna, same thing. Very, very good player in his prime. And these are players that played at the highest level. Claudio Reyna played for Rangers when Rangers was very, very good, in the 90s or whatever. He also played for Wolfsburg in Germany. So, like, yeah, I don't mean to interrupt, but one of the things with Pulisic for me is for me, the main reason why it didn't work at Chelsea and why it ended up not working at Dortmund is because he is such a patchy player. When he's good, he's very, very good. That's not disputable, but I feel like that comes and goes. And you've seen that at Milan. He's been better at Milan this season, but even still, he still is inconsistent. And when your best player is inconsistent, that's it.
Yeah.
That's kind of it for me.
But also, like, on a global scale, I think people really overrate the talent that he is. I've had this conversation with coworkers, with people at parties, where people ask me about things related to the sport, because I have a reputation for being really into soccer, and so I'll get asked, who do I think is the best player in the world? Like, what team do I think is going to win so and so, yada yada, right? And for the best player in the world conversations, I'll always give kind of the usual suspects, right? Like, a few years ago it was Messi, maybe Ronaldo, maybe Neymar. Now we're talking Mbappe, Bellingham, Vinny Jr., Lamine Yamal, right? I mean, Rodri even. And when I say those names, a lot of Americans, they might know Mbappe, right? And then they're like, oh, well, what about Christian Pulisic? And I'll be like, what about him? Like, he's a great player. He's not the top 5. Like, he might be in the top 100, but like, he's not up there. And I think a lot of people, because of how Pulisic is covered by American outlets. Like, I remember during the last World Cup, right? People were talking about Lionel Messi and Kevin De Bruyne and Christian Pulisic, and I was like, and who? Like, I like you said, I think he's had a really good season with Milan. I think he's a really talented player. He probably is the most talented player on the roster for the US, but I think a lot of the captainship around him is just him, like, looking like he's trying. You know what I mean? Yeah, I don't know. I think we overrate him so much, and I think that kind of leaves people just overrating the team generally and thinking this team can do anything because we've got Captain America on it, and that's just not the case. So
it's the cringiest nickname on the planet. Let's just be clear. I can't. I want to read the Landon Donovan quotes from the post one, and then Thierry, I knew something very interesting about the captaincy that you just brought up that we should talk about. But Donovan said, "quote I'm so sick of hearing how quote talented unquote this group of players is and all the amazing clubs they play for. If you aren't going to show up and actually give a shit about playing for your national team, decline the invite. Talent is great, pride is better." And to me, that's actually really interesting because if you were to put up the national team of Donovan and Dempsey, they would absolutely mop the floor with this current pool of players. Yeah. And you could argue that the current talent pool is maybe a little better than the collective of Donovan and Dempsey's team, but they were a better team, cohesively better, tactically better. They understood each other much better on the pitch, and they also worked harder. This is a team that they would match up against England and not be afraid get a 1-1 draw in World Cups, that kind of thing. Previous U.S. teams went toe-to-toe with Germany, and in 2006, beat Portugal, these kind of things. This U.S. team's not doing that. And not only is it because there's a huge quality gap, but they don't have the other intangibles to make up to mitigate the quality gap. And this is why I always tell people, if you want to know my thoughts about football in the U.S., go watch Miracle. Go watch and research what Herb Brooks had to do in 1980 with the U.S. Olympic hockey team to close the gap to be able to beat the Russians, to be able to beat Sweden, Finland, and whoever else it was. And there was that famous quote where you don't have enough talent, to rely on talent alone. And this is how the U.S. is. There's not nearly enough talent in the U.S. player pool to where they can go on and make a statement. And if you look at, let's just take France, for example, because they're going to be a favorite in next year. There isn't a single player on the U.S. team that even makes France's bench. That includes Pulisic.
Yeah.
And when you break it down that way, and then you can run through Spain, Argentina, Brazil, arguably Germany, Portugal, all those teams, not a single U.S. player is making the bench of any of those national teams. If that's the gap in quality, you should be having conversations about how do we mitigate that. And it's not about trying to go toe-to-toe with them. It's not about platforming a single player in Pulisic. It's got to be more about it's football collectivism. And that's what made Croatia such an interesting story to follow, in Modric's prime, because they were just a very good team. They had some key talented individuals, there's no doubt about it. That Rakitic, Modric, midfield duopoly. You had Mandzukic up front, who was such a workhorse as a center forward, and he had a very small window in Europe where he was probably considered one of the top 5 center forwards in Europe, but that window was incredibly small. But Croatia was such a good team collectively that they would be able to go deeper in tournaments. The U.S. doesn't have that about themselves, and also leadership is poor. And this goes into something Henry said, where he said the U.S. has abjectly failed. I'll paraphrase it, but he said the U.S. they've abjectly failed because they've looked at Pulisic as the most talented player and just automatically assumed, well, he should be the captain. He has no captain's qualities. He doesn't lead really vocally. He's not that kind of that Roy Keane type. He's not that Patrick Vieira type. People forget that, how often Vieira had the armband. Over Henry, who was the better player. Over Bergkamp, who was the better player. And being captain isn't about always being the best player. And typically it's not. There's someone like a Tyler Adams, Weston McKennie. These are, even maybe Jedi for a certain Tim Ream. These are other names that maybe should be getting shots for the captaincy over Pulisic. And if you remove that captaincy responsibility from him, maybe he'll actually start to perform better, because that pressure of he's already being platformed as the face of the U.S. men's soccer. He's wearing the armband, Captain America, best player in U.S. history, all these tropes. And then he's also himself personally stated that he feels like this isn't the type of player he is. He's not that captaincy focal point type of leader that is going to kind of get you over the line in those moments. So if he himself is telling you that, you should probably listen to him. So
yeah,
I feel like there's too many questions, and the only clarity we have in my mind about the U.S. is that they're just not nearly as good enough as people think. And when you're getting beat by Panama, when Mexico is massively in decline and you're struggling to beat them, they lost to Jamaica recently as well. I think just before Pochettino came in, if I remember correctly. I just feel like,
and I don't think it's a matter of how much they care, right? Like, I don't think these guys show up and just walk around and they're like, whatever, right? But I think 2 things, right? First of all, in this international break, we had several key injuries. Serginho Dest was injured. Anthony Robinson was unavailable. Flo Balogun was unavailable. I don't think Tim Ream played at all. I think he was out as well. So I mean, those are both your starting fullbacks, maybe your best striker, maybe your best defender, and and Austin Trusty. Austin Trusty also wasn't available. And to see the guys who came and filled in light of those injuries, I think was really telling in terms of what the talent pool is, right? Because you had Arfston and McKenzie, who I wasn't impressed by at all, especially McKenzie for Jonathan David's goal when we played Canada, backed off him. Jonathan David had the ball in the penalty area, and Mark McKenzie backed off him like in the opposite direction, like literally just gave him a channel to shoot at goal, instead of, descending on him like you should be doing in that situation. I think Diego Luna was okay. Joe Scally definitely had something of a disaster class against Canada. And then Fossey, I think, replaced Scally at halftime, and I don't think he had a great game either. The talent's not there. And so, I think that starting 11 is pretty good. But even then, you're talking about a team that like probably doesn't get grouped, but that's about it in terms of what you can ask from them. But yeah, I think it's just like this attitude of like, we're America, so we have to be the best. And like, that's just not true. So I think it's really a perfect storm of the team not being as good as people think it is, having some key injuries, being in a moment in the season where, maybe players aren't as excited to leave their club teams and go play meaningless international friendlies that someone slapped a trophy onto to make it matter a little bit more. They're playing for a new manager in a system that's probably very complicated for them, right? The chemistry's all over the place, right? And Pochettino, I think, is still kind of chopping and changing a little bit, trying to figure out what works, seeing what players he wants to go with. So it's not like we're looking at the final product either, but I guess the thing I keep thinking about when I look at this U.S. men's national team is the Egyptian team that won the African Nations Cup 3 times in a row. I think it was 2008, 2010, 2012, or it might have been 2006, 2008, 2010. But they won the African Nations Cup 3 times in a row. And, they got past some of the best players in the history of Africa in order to do it, right? Didier Drogba, Samuel Eto'o, both Toure brothers, Solomon Kalou, John Obi Mikel, Michael Essien, like all these guys were playing in the tournament. And, we came up against Cote d'Ivoire in really key moments of the tournament, and we still managed to get past them with an Egypt team whose biggest stars were, Mito and Mohamed Zidane, maybe Amr Zeki, if you wanna throw him in there.
Wasn't El Neni playing for you back then yet? Or no, this was before him, wasn't it?
No, yeah, it's before El
Yeah,
Neni.
he was still at Basel, and so it was before Salah as well.
Yeah, I think Hossein Redi was kind of the prototype for Mohamed El Neni, I think.
Right.
So you had some guys who like had played in Europe a little bit, but like weren't big players for their teams. Zidane was kind of a bit of a journeyman having played for several teams across, kind of like Germany and Austria, and I think he was in Belgium, maybe Switzerland. I'm pretty sure he played for like Midtjylland or something. But those guys weren't even the best players on the team, right? And the reason why Egypt managed to do this unmatched achievement, right, and win 3 in a row and make it 6 African Nation Cup titles at the time. They won a 7th later. But the reason they managed to do all of that was because they had chemistry, right? You had a midfield of Mohamed Barakat and Mohamed Aboutrika, and behind them was Wael Goma at center back, and then behind Wael Goma was Issam El Hadri. And these guys were playing, and you had like Hossam Ashur, and you had all these guys who played for Al Ahly, 50, 60 times a year, and were playing in the Egyptian League, were playing in the African Champions League. have really understood each other on such a deep level that they are able to cope with coming up against these really talented teams. So, I think chemistry is such an important part of a national team makeup. And yeah, like you said, I think people are just seeing these players, at Juventus and at Milan and, at Arsenal and Fulham and all the rest, right? And saying to themselves, oh, well, they must be amazing. Throw them all on the pitch at the same time. And I think you have a manager who still doesn't really understand the players that he's working with, which I don't blame him for, right? But yeah, I think just these are all things that are coming together, and people are, starting to panic because we're a little over a year out from the World Cup, and I think people were maybe expecting this all to click really quickly. So, yeah, I don't know. I'm oddly at peace with it. Like, I don't think this team is as bad as people are making out it is, but also I never had supremely high expectations of the U.S. to begin with. Like, when we get to the World Cup, I think what I want is just to not get grouped. And then after that, it really depends on who we come up against in the knockout rounds.
Yeah, that's also kind of, there's a degree of luck you need in the World Cup to if you get out of the group, to avoid like a massive round of 16 tie, so you can keep some momentum. But unfortunately, you can't luck your way through into a World Cup win. It's not possible.
Yeah,
there's a reason why the amount of teams that have won the World Cup is rather small, and they're all the best teams that have won the World Cup. You've never had a genuine, gigantic shock apart from, I would say, 54. When Germany won their first World Cup, because they beat Hungary, who at the time, and many still feel that Hungary side in the early 50s was the best national team in history, who also never won a World Cup. That's probably the only moment you could say would be that would have been like an actual shock of the best team they're not winning it, or but they still made the final. That's the thing. So when it comes to the U.S., I would probably agree with you. I don't think the team is the team isn't bad, but I feel like, just for example, this is the level of overrating I mean. If I was to ask you, like, how would you rate Alphonso Davies in general?
Better than any player on the U.S.
Okay. Do you know how many people I saw yesterday say that Alphonso Davies does not start for the U.S.?
What?
Exactly. This is what I mean. There are a lot of U.S. fans who genuinely feel that the U.S. is so good that Alphonso Davies, who has been at Bayern for his entire European career, who Real Madrid desperately wanted to get in the summer, would not walk into the U.S. side and be their best player as a left back. Genuinely, he's a better player than anyone the U.S. has currently.
True. I'll take this step further. Alphonso Davies would start for us at right wing.
100%. He would start at left wing as well. Yeah, that's how good he is. So this is kind of what I mean. This is where I'm saying a lot of U.S. fans feel like these players are so much better than they actually are, that the humbling was necessary. But at the same time, looking at, and I think you made a great point, where you can say, yeah, it's great that, Musa's at Milan and Pusic's at Milan, McKinney's at Juve, Anthony Robinson probably will be leaving Fulham at some point, and he should, because Jedi is a good player. I think he deserves to be a team above Fulham. I think we can probably say that pretty confidently. Who knows where Balogun will end up, but he'll probably end up, leaving Monaco at some point for somewhere else. These are all, they're good players, but good individual players. International football is different than that. Like I said before, that Croatia team, I always think about the Croatia team. You just said before, chemistry with Egypt. That's a prime example. Like same thing with Japan. There isn't a single Japanese player in Japanese national team player pool who is a star at the highest level. They've got a couple of very good players at Celtic who do quite well, who are getting some looks at from bigger teams, sure. But the bulk of them are just very good players who fit their system. Is a very technical one. And Matoma, a prime example. He's very, very good, but will he leave Brighton? Is he good enough to go on and play for, like, say, Arsenal? I don't know. I'm not quite sure. And the fact that you're asking that question means that maybe he won't ever be better than a star for Brighton. but that's still a team who is perennially in the top 7, top 8 in the Premier League, which is the best league in the world. He's got a reputation. He's a good player. So, like, it's not always about names. You just have to find pieces that fit together. And I think if Pochettino can do that, then maybe he rights the ship. But unfortunately, there's so much politics as well with the federation, with fans, with MLS having too much of a say about how things matter with the national team, which is a bit bizarre to me. And of course, there's a whole other podcast about how the federation and MLS don't work hand in hand to produce the best players possible. That's another massive issue that permeates. But overall, I think, like I said at the beginning, there is enough time to rectify the issues. And I do agree. I think when a lot of players are back fit, you might see a better iteration of what we saw over the current international break. But at the same time, we're not there yet.
Yeah,
the U.S. is generally not there yet. In terms
also, in addition to kind of the ceiling of the team and the politics, I think it's also important to consider the floor.
Yeah,
who's the worst player on the France national team that played in this international break
currently? Rabiot?
Yeah.
Like maybe or Desiree Du, and he's young and he's gifted, but he's probably I think he got his first cap, but didn't he also score?
I think so, and I think personally, I think Doué is amazing, but
right. I'm not saying he's a bad player, but that's the thing. He's not. He's a good player, and we're talking to him. He's the worst player in the French team potentially, and look how good he is. He also probably sucks for the U.S. By the way, I'm just throwing it out there. So yeah, I think those are the levels involved.
And then you look at our floor, right, and it's. It's Arston, it's McKenzie, it's Fossey, right? It's Brian White, who chests the ball down in the fucking 6-yard box. I'm not going to do it.
Breathe, champ.
Yeah. I couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe it. But yeah, like that's our floor, right? Like, and so I think that's so important in international tournaments as well, because if you do get injuries, right? If England get 2 injuries at right center back, then they're just going to roll out, like they'll roll out fucking Kyle Walker or something at right center back, or they'll move people around.
Right.
And they'll put someone out there who's still a starter in a Premier League team. But if we get 2 injuries at right center back, then like we're starting some guy who, might be a key player for like the Columbus Crew or something. And that's not to knock MLS teams, but like it's a drop in quality, frankly speaking. So and I guess that just goes back to how much people overrate the team. So yeah, I don't know. I think that, like I said, I think this team is better than what we've seen, but the ceiling isn't really all that high. And personally, I worry that that's going to contribute to next year's World Cup maybe not being a great experience for a lot of us.
For so many other reasons, which we also won't discuss today.
Yeah.
But keeping it brief before we end, you and I spoke about this yesterday, I think it was. And I think we agreed that there's probably 6 or 7 U.S. players that we think are like nailed on in the 11.
Yeah,
that are good to very good players.
I think the way I phrased it was like there's 6 or 7 that I trust
to
not blow the game.
The fact that you don't have an 11 that you can trust is pretty telling, because any other very good national team you'll come up against in a World Cup, they don't just trust their 11. They trust 5 to 6 to 7 guys through the bench as well, as key contributors, whether if it's through rotation or if there's an injury, like you say, or if you need a spark 20 minutes, when you're 1-1 in the quarterfinals or whatever, you bring these players on. The U.S. does not have that, and I think that's also pretty telling in terms of where we're at. And it's not to say that things will improve over the years, but again, we're still a nation who views the sport as the 5th most popular sport, and our best athletes go and play other things typically. So yeah, a lot of it's also just cultural, and there's so much, and I think and to close, Tim Howard, I'm pretty sure. Also, for those of you who are U.S. fans or U.S. based, you should probably listen to Tim Howard's and Landon Donovan's podcast. It's actually very, very good. I give him a lot of props for that. But Tim Howard said that he doubts the U.S. will ever win a World Cup in his lifetime, and he's my age. So in the next 40 years, he doesn't think the U.S. will win a World Cup. And it's hard to see where that's incorrect because we're up against so many other better collective footballing producing nations who have, for the last, call it 60 years, in some cases longer, been producing elite level athletes on a conveyor belt that has not stopped.
Yep. Closing
that gap is almost impossible.
So, it's not something we're committed to.
Exactly. Yeah. If like the U.S. economy, how it geared itself to World War II, if we reshaped our entire sporting collective to focus on just football, we probably would have woke up in 10 years, probably 15 years.
Yeah.
Yeah. But that's not ever going to happen. So
imagine if LeBron James and and Steph Curry and Bijan Robinson. I know that's kind of a random football player that I just thought of, but that's the first thing that came to mind. But just like, imagine the best players in the NBA and the NFL and, the NHL and MLB. Also, I think it was Clint Dempsey who said years ago that the best soccer player in the U.S. is pumping gas somewhere. And I think that also just kind of speaks to how poor we've been at cultivating talent, even when players do choose to play soccer over other sports. So,
yep.
It's I think they're probably right. I don't think we are going to see the U.S. win a World Cup anytime soon. I'd love to be proven wrong, but I mean that's just kind of the state of affairs at this point.
Agreed. Yeah.
Well. On that depressing note,
is reality.
Yeah, we'll still win some continental titles. I think that'll be fine. But yeah, we'll leave it there, and we'll be back with you later on this week, hopefully to do an all-time Arsenal 11 draft, and maybe talk about some other bits and bobs that come up. I think I heard that we're going to announce Andrea Berta at some point this week. So hopefully we'll have that to talk about either Thursday or Friday. And obviously we'll preview the Fulham match as well. So we'll be back with you to do all those things. Again, I'm Sham. You can follow me on Twitter at Shamsdale and on Blue Sky at shamsdale.bsky.social. That's Drew. You can follow him on Twitter at GeeChyKid and on Blue Sky at supplyanddemanddrew.bsky.social. The podcast, you can follow at Not That Gooner, notthatgooner.bsky.social on Twitter and Blue Sky, respectively, at Not That Kind of Gooner on Instagram, Not That Kind of Gooner on YouTube. If you're listening on Spotify and Apple Podcasts, please do, give us a 5-star review and, follow the pod on there as well. We really appreciate it. It really helps out in terms of putting the pod out there in front of more people to listen. And, we will, again, be back with you Thursday or Friday, talk about some more stuff. So thank you so much for being here with us, and thank you for coming on this ride with us and on this journey. And hopefully we'll have a couple exciting things to announce in the near future. But until then, take care and bye. Bye.
Secret Gooner. All right, I'm a Gooner.
Kyle Saka!